Hi everyone, welcome to our second week of the spiritual practices of deeper learning. This week we will be looking at internal spiritual practices and we'll be looking particularly at meditation. The other day my children and I were laughing, and I'll tell you why. Is because it was after school, and by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon both of my children started laughing and said to me, "Mom, do you know how many times you've asked us whether or not we have homework?" So I looked at them and I said, maybe once. And they started laughing and they said, "No, you don't understand." They said, "Since we came home from school, we've been counting and you have asked us 17 times in the last hour and a half whether or not we have homework." And so I looked at them, and at first I thought they were pulling my leg, and then I realized they were dead serious. So I looked at them and I said to them, "Well, do you?" They were flabbergasted and responded, "No, we don't." And so I said to them, "Well, why haven't you answered me the last 17 times? And they both looked at me and said, "Mom, we have." I realized to my horror that I had asked them 17 times whether or not they have homework, and both of them answered me 17 times, and it wasn't a complicated answer. They simply said no. And every time I didn't hear them, I didn't listen, or I didn't remember what they were saying. And I realized it was because I was so preoccupied with everything else in my life. My head was spinning with work stuff and what needs to be done and what am I going to cook for supper and what has to happen tomorrow and the next week. And everything was so much, it took so much time and space in my head that I didn't actually hear them. And I felt terrible because I realized that here are two people that I love with all of my heart. And yet, because of busyness and being preoccupied, I wasn't able to connect with them, to hear them, to listen to them, and even though it was something as simple as asking whether or not they have homework. In today's society, we live in this plague of busyness. I think it's G.C. Young who says that busyness is not of the devil, busyness is the devil. And we live in the society where we are so busy and so preoccupied and under so much pressure. And we live in a society that says that if you want to be important, you have to be busy. That places a high value on productivity and efficiency. And so we start falling into this trap of being busy all the time. And all that busyness does, all that being preoccupied with our thoughts does, all that stress and anxiety do, is they rob us of being present with the people who matter in our lives. And if that is true with the people we can see and hear and touch, how much more true isn't that with God Himself? When I am preoccupied with busyness and efficiency and effectiveness and productivity and I'm go, go, go all the time, I no longer hear the voice of God, feel the promptings of the Spirit, relish in the presence of God. And meditation is about setting aside a time until eventually it's a lifestyle. But it's about setting aside time where we can enter into the presence of God for ourselves, not allowing someone else to do it for us, not trying to hear from someone else what God says. But meditation is about saying, I'm going to put everything down. I'm going to let go of everything around me. And I'm going to listen to you. It's the equivalent of me saying to my children, let me stop. Pull up a chair and let's have a conversation. And meditation is important because not only does it slow us down in this busy and hectic world, but it is a time where we get to connect with God for ourselves. The benefits of meditation is obviously there are benefits for us psychologically. It helps with anxiety and stress and burnout and all those things. But the greatest benefit is that it develops our relationship with God, that we have time and a space where we're able to connect meaningfully with God. It's spiritually good for us. That's what meditation is, and the question is, why is it good for us, or what benefits are they? And I've shared some of those, but we might be wondering, how do we do meditations? And the first thing that I'd like to say is meditation very much, it involves our imagination. It's about sitting and finding a place and allowing our imagination to work with us and discover what God is saying to us. And hopefully as we read the notes and unpack some of the exercises and practice them, hopefully it'll come more naturally. If after this you're still not sure, I would really suggest that you go and do a meditation with a guide. In the last couple of months, I've been feeling a bit harassed. I've been stressed at work. This has not been an easy season for churches. I've been stressed at home. Children are really struggling. I've been stressed in every area at the moment. And I find that I've also been exceptionally busy. A couple of weeks ago, two colleagues of mine from separate churches approached me and shared about a guided retreat that was happening. It was a 6-week-long retreat. It was simply one morning a week for an hour and a half, and it was with a guide who studied with the Jesuit Institute. And it was particularly aimed at ministers. So two separate colleagues, without speaking to each other, told me about this and suggested that I go. And so I thought perhaps this is a prompting from God, and I went. But I have to confess that the first week as I was driving there, and it was in Edenvale, the first week as I was driving there, I made as many phone calls as I possibly could on the way with my Bluetooth. I made as many phone calls as possible on the way so that I could be efficient and make up for the time that was going to be lost. But when I got there, I was a few minutes early, so I took out my computer and found a spot in the garden at the church, and I worked on some of the stuff that I had to do. I was actually writing devotions for our next sermon series, and I worked on stuff. Then the whole time, I kept thinking, I don't have time for this. And if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be letting down a whole lot of people. And I walked into this meditation and I felt rushed and harassed and stressed. And after an hour and a half, I have to admit that I suddenly realized that everything that was stressing me, everything that felt so big and so overwhelming, was actually quite insignificant in the larger scheme of life. I have to confess that every week for the next 6 weeks after that, I had the same feeling of I don't have time for this. And every week at the end of it, I realized it's exactly what I needed. It calmed me down. It put things in perspective. It helped me see that what I thought was important is actually maybe not vital. What I thought was urgent is not important. It just allowed me to gain a perspective on all those things that were harassing me that I'd never had before. And suddenly I realized that meditation, and I've always been fond of meditation, but I've never realized how much I need it until this season. And suddenly I realized that meditation is not for those who have nothing to do. Meditation is vital for everyone. Meditation allows us to place the worries of this life, the stresses of this life, the anxiety of this life. It allows us to take that and place it in perspective with the eternity of God. And so it helps us to release it and let it go, put it in perspective. And suddenly we realize over time that the temporal things of this life are nothing in comparison with the eternity of God. And so we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And that's part of why meditation is so important. Now you might be wondering, how do we meditate? How do I learn this? Especially if you've never done it. I know many of you have done this, and many of you are actually guides in yourself, and so forgive me for the simplicity of this. But how do we meditate? And the first thing is, you can't learn it from a book. You can't read about it and be like, oh, I know meditation. It's about practicing it and finding what works for each of us. And Richard Foster gives us some very good advice. He gives us things, practical advice, and they're in the notes. He says things like, the place is important. We can meditate anywhere, but to find a place where it's quiet, where there are less distractions, to switch off our cell phones and not be bothered by them, to find a place where we're comfortable, where it's quiet. The best kind of place is out in nature, whether that's in your garden or overlooking your garden, or by a tree, or with plants, surrounded by plants. Somehow creation helps. But to find a place that is still and undistracted. It's also helpful to find a place that you can keep going back to. If we have to take up meditation as our daily practice and spend most of our time every day running around trying to find a new place, it'll leave us distracted, frustrated, and stressed out. And so once you've found a place that works for you, try and go back there and use that place again. Another thing that's important is our posture, the way we sit. You can sit down and sit as comfortably as possible. Try and keep your body open. Our body, our mind, our souls, they're all connected. Try and keep that as open as possible. Be comfortable. You can lie down if you'd like to. One of the things that I learned on the 6-week retreat, and I've heard it before, but it just struck me differently this time, is that if ever you fall asleep in a meditation, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It means, first of all, that perhaps that's exactly what you needed. And secondly, it means that we're quite comfortable in the presence of God. And so it's not something to be ashamed of or shy away from. And so become comfortable. Find a spot where you're at peace. And the next thing that's important is to learn to engage our imagination. Throughout meditation isn't only about emptying our mind. And that's very much an Eastern practice. It's not about saying, I will think of nothing and I will experience nothing and I'll just sit here in emptiness. No, meditation is about saying, I'm going to let go of some things and pick up others. I'm going to let go of the old in order to pick up the new. It's letting go of our stresses and anxieties and worries and sinfulness, and picking up God's comfort and grace and healing and peace and joy. So that's meditation, and it involves our imagination. Sometimes we'll meditate through a scripture, and as you read the story, spend time meditating on it and asking, what does it smell like? What would it look like? What am I feeling right now? Where am I in the story? Who am I in the story? And then what would I say to God or Jesus? And what is God saying to me? So it involves our imagination as well. And the important thing to remember when it comes to meditation is that we meditate because God invites us into his presence. If we have this desire to meditate, and the most effective meditation is one that we really long for. When we really long to connect with God's Spirit and God's presence, that's when meditation is effective. If we're just doing it to simply tick a box, then we are probably wasting our time. But meditation is about, just connecting with the Spirit of God. And so it's also scriptural. The Psalms speak about, I meditate, Psalm 119, I meditate on God's word day and night, or on his law. Psalm 1 speaks about meditation. In the story of Rebecca and Isaac was out meditating in the field. And meditation becomes a way of life, and it's a way of us engaging with God for ourselves. And so you may be wondering how, and I'd like to just give a few exercises, and they're in the book, or in the notes. They come from Richard Foster's book,